Lecture 19, The Return and Fall of Richard M. Nixon, 1968 to 1974. This is effectively the end of the class. Of course, when the fellow wrote the notes 20 years ago, it was a more reasonable end. So one of these days, once I graduate, I will work on making this class go farther into the future. Of course, that leaves the old question, what do you think I should take out? So anyway, let's talk about Richard Milhouse Nixon. All right. Let's get on with it. Oh, by the way, if you're pausing this to try to write this stuff down before we go forward, I'm going to cut E way down to size when we get to that. Okay, so if you're writing this stuff down, don't worry about this right at the moment, because I'm going to shrink it a lot when we get to that part. Okay? Everything else, good to go. So, election of 1968. With the last video, I left you with Lyndon Baines Johnson saying he would not run for re-election as president. And I said this would make a wide open contest. There is no incumbent that has the incumbent advantage going into the election. Okay? All right. So, let's see what we go. Now, we've already met Richard Nixon. He ran for president in 1960. So remember, he'd been a congressman from California, gone after Alger Hiss. He was a senator from California for just a little while before he became Eisenhower's vice president in 1952. Okay. Did 8 years as vice president. We covered the election of 1960, where Nixon lost to Kennedy by just a razor-thin margin. Nixon went back home to California. He ran for governor of California but lost. And he told the press, "You won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore." But now he's back. He's decided to run for president in 1968. And now other people were running, of course, for Republican nomination. I believe, if I recall, I think George Romney, who's Mitt Romney's dad, I think ran. So anyway, several people ran, but Nixon won the Republican primaries, and he gets the nod to be the nominee. Okay? Let me get you some pictures here. Oh, this isn't on the outline, but the picture always reminds me when I hit it. 68 is a rough year. Okay? It starts with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. So people sitting at home, watching television, see this explosion in South Vietnam with the communists attacking everywhere. That's in January, right? Okay. Well, it just keeps getting better. Okay. In spring, I believe it was March, but in the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., who you see here on the left, was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay. Was it Memphis or Nashville? Anyway, he came out of the motel room. Somebody shot him. Sadly. Actually, if there's a picture of it here. This other fellow. This guy right here. This is Robert Kennedy. He's the younger brother of the slain president, John Kennedy. Okay? All right. Now, with Lyndon Johnson stepping down as president and not running for re-election, it's wide open for the Democratic contest. And Robert Kennedy is one of the people running. Now, there were other people running too, but Robert Kennedy is, by some people's favor because, he's the son of the slain president. Okay, he's got some of that same persona, and so he's running. But then, like I said, things happen. Okay, so I already told you, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. My smiling face here is covering up, the picture, but there's his entourage pointing to where they think the shots have come from. Now, this motel is now a civil rights museum. Okay, so if you're ever in that part of the world, you can stop and see it. They've preserved the room like it's in a time capsule. Okay, going back to 1968. Okay, and then so this was in the spring. Then in the late spring, turning into summer, you know, Robert Kennedy has just won the California primary, the Democratic primary for the state of California, which is worth a whole lot of delegates. And this will make him the front runner going into the Democratic convention, which would be later, of course. So there's other people running, but Robert Kennedy, by winning California, has picked up a bunch of delegates, and so it looks like he's turning into the favorite candidate. But then, tragically, he is assassinated as well. Okay, he's at a hotel. He's going to give like a victory speech. He's just won the race, and he's walking, and somebody jumps out and shoots him, kills him. Okay. So his second Kennedy brother has met a horrible, horrific end. Okay. So to people at home, it's like, first you get Tet, then you get MLK, then you get RFK. It's just bam, 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 bad news, bad news, bad news. Okay. So back to Nixon. Here's a picture of Nixon. That's what I was expecting next. Okay. I told you the PowerPoint's partially here to keep me on track. Yeah, you believe me, don't you? So Dick Nixon, former vice president, runs for the Republican nomination. Now, his vice presidential candidate is one of the all-time great names in political history. Spiro Agnew. Okay? Spiro Agnew. If I recall, I think he was like governor of Maryland. Okay? He wasn't a big national figure, but he ends up being the running mate. Okay? Spiro Agnew, I remember this. I'm old enough to remember this. They got a lot of ribbing because of his name. Okay, so and I said one day in class, I said, I've never met anybody named Spiro. And one of my students said, oh, it's a Greek name. My family's Greek. I said, well, see, I learned something. Okay, but they made a lot of fun of him back in the day. They actually had a Spiro Agnew wristwatch. I remember these. Okay, the joke was, back then a lot of people wore Mickey Mouse wristwatches. So the joke was that Mickey Mouse wore a Spiro Agnew wristwatch, and someone actually produced Spiro Agnew wristwatches, and they were. You might be able to find one on eBay. I should go look just for grids. I never owned one. Okay. And Nixon's going to run largely like on a law and order platform. Okay, he's talking about several things. Okay, remember we've had these riots. We've had riots in the streets of Watts and Detroit. Okay, we've had the assassinations. We've had Tet, and Nixon's going to run on a we need to kind of get a handle on where things are going type platform. He also says he has a way to end the war in Vietnam, although apparently he's not real specific about it. Okay, but he's saying I will wrap this thing up. We want to win, but we also need to end it. Okay. So this is kind of what he's talking about. Vietnam and law and order at home. Okay. Now, there's a ringer in this one. Okay. There's a wild card, and that's the American Party. Okay, featuring George Wallace. So yeah, George Wallace. He should be on the next slide here. Oh, that's Hubert Humphrey. He's the vice president. We'll talk about him more in a couple of minutes. Okay, so remember, Johnson was Kennedy's vice president. When Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson became president. Okay, and so there was like a year there was no vice president. So around about this time, they passed the constitutional amendment to create a way to fill an occupancy in the office of vice president. I don't remember which number it is off the top of my head. It might be the 25th, but I'm just literally pulling that out of the thin air. Okay. Because what if something happens? Something happens to president, vice president becomes president. Then what if something happens to that president? And who's in the wings? You're going to bring in the Speaker of the House. Okay. Well, so they actually established a procedure. But anyway, in '64, when Johnson runs, he'll put a vice president on the ticket. So Hubert Humphrey, who we've already met, will be the vice president. Okay. This will be important in a few minutes. Okay. Oh no, it's important now because here's the slide. Okay. See, I'm doing it out of my brain. I should look at the PowerPoint before I do the recording. Hubert Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey enters the stage late. He's not running to be president, okay, at first. All right. But then when Robert Kennedy is assassinated, okay, he was the front runner. Hubert Humphrey kind of jumps into the game late. Okay. Kind of like Joe Biden this time. I mean, Joe Biden joined Joe Biden joined the race prior to the primary starting, but he was like one of the last people to get into it. Okay. Uh, or Michael Bloomberg, who didn't actually get into it in time to be in some of the early primaries. We know what happened to him. But Humphrey, of course, is vice president. So anyway, when Kennedy is assassinated, Humphrey says, "Yeah, man, I better get into the race because some of the other people running." And for instance, there was a guy named Eugene McCarthy. Don't confuse him with Joseph McCarthy. He was, kind of a real far left wing, Democrat. A lot of the kids liked, McCarthy. And so Hubert Humphrey's like, man, I better get in because we need somebody who can, make a credible showing. Okay, so the Democrats are going to have their convention in Chicago, Illinois, their national convention where they pick their candidate. Okay, now here's the deal. I mean, this is in the height of the protest against the Vietnam War. We got the Flower Power movement. We got anarchists, Students for Democratic Society. You got what's going to happen is every hippie and yippie, which was a different group. Yippies were political. Hippies were just people who wanted to free love and smoke pot and live in communes and that kind of stuff. The yippies were actually politically active, kind of Abby Hoffman, I think, was a yippie. Anyway, don't worry about that. You'll probably encounter some of these people in the book. Okay, they're very want to express their anger. Okay, and then of course people are against the war. So what's happened is everybody who's mad about something wants to go to Chicago to the Democratic National Convention and see if they can get some time in front of the TV cameras protesting. Now, the guy in charge of Chicago was a guy named Richard Daley. He was the mayor of Chicago for about 704 years, I think. And he's an old school, tough Chicago Democrat boss type guy. And he's going, there will be order. We're not going to have, anarchy in the streets. And so, he's got the cops mobilized. You'll notice in this picture there's some National Guardsmen there too. Okay. Well, what's going to happen is this breaks into violence, and I'll tell you why. What happens is, okay, so the people who are, been the delegates who are supposed to support Kennedy's out of the picture. He's been assassinated. So they're kind of like wild cards, right? Who are they going to vote for? And so there's all this, because nobody's going to go into this convention with enough delegates to win on the first ballot. So we're going to have to sort it out at the convention. Okay? And what's going to happen is the convention, which is usually attended by, hardcore, faithful party type establishment sorts, they're going to pick Hubert Humphrey as the candidate. Okay? This is going to trigger a lot of anger among the youngsters because, Humphrey is seen as the establishment candidate. Okay, he's part of the Johnson administration. These are the people responsible for Vietnam. Okay, and so violence breaks out in the streets of Chicago. Okay, and the cops are beating people up with billy clubs. This gets on the news and people see it. Now, what the news camera, here's how it works. If you're an anarchist or a yippie or a communist or a malcontent of some sort, you throw something at the cops to provoke a reaction. You throw a rock at them. When they turn and whack you with a billy club, the news cameras are going, look, that person's being beaten up. So yes, the cops reacted violently. I'm not justifying it, but sometimes cops are funny that way. You call them names and you throw things at them, and sometimes they whack you upside the head. Okay, and the cameras only catch the latter half. Okay? So there's all these protests going on outside the Democratic National Convention, and people sitting at home or watching this going, man, the Democrats can't even run a convention. How are they going to run the country? And this could have cost them some points in the election. And we're coming up on the pause spot here, so we'll stop. We'll pick up with another video.